Ladies and gentlemen, we still have a little bit more to our day as we prepare, as you can see behind me, our next segment, the SMW Leaders Perspective. Now, this will be a panel discussion that you can all participate in, and I'll share more details with you. It is entitled Views from the Top, Building the Case for Transformation in Sustainability, Finance and Talent. Now, how you can participate in this segment is to join us on the online interactive Q&A platform called Pigeonhole. So we will now just flash the QR code. You could just take your phones out and scan it in. Log on, there's a password as well. Or you can always go on to www.pigeonhole.com. And this will allow you to post your questions and participate in this panel discussion. Now, to moderate this panel, as we prepare this space, I'm very pleased to welcome on stage Vice President of Maritime and Supply Chain Excellence of BHP, ladies and gentlemen, Mr Rashpal Bhatti. Please welcome him. Mr Bhatti, join us on stage. I'd just like to make a note that this segment will be a mask-off segment, and Mr. Bhatti will be taking over to introduce our panel speakers. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. Singapore is undoubtedly the leading international maritime centre of the world. And first of all, I'd like to congratulate Lei Hoon and all of her team for bringing the 16th Singapore Maritime Week together. And it is so exciting today that we're sitting here together in a room with people, with all of those people and friends in the industry who are going to take us forward in these next few years. So today we have a very distinguished panel for you to talk about sustainability and the other transformation characteristics that the DPM talked about. So without further ado, I'd like to, first of all, welcome the chairman of the BW Group, Andreas Sohmen-Pao.
Great to see you.
You okay there? Yes. Then we have the chairman of the Shell Group of companies in Singapore, Kah Peng. Welcome. Next, we have the global CEO of the One Company, Jeremy Nixon. Welcome, Jeremy.
Thank you, Rashpal.
And lastly, but definitely not leastly, he's flown over from London to grace this occasion. Please welcome Stephen Fewster, the Global Head of Shipping Finance at ING Bank. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you.
Please. Good. So we have the best part of about 38 minutes, it says in front of me here, to talk about sustainability, finance and talent. Clearly not time enough, but we will make the best effort to get as much through as many points as possible. And for you all, the objective today, for all the people sitting in this hall and everybody listening virtually, is for us to take away some provocative thought, some seed, some level of thought that you can then take away and collaborate on with the people who you talk to later this week. Before we go there, I just want to take a minute because I think it would be remiss of us not to spend 30 seconds to talk about the 1.6 million seafarers who move that 80 to 90% of product around the world. And in these last 2 years, the DPM talked about it, Minister Iswaran talked about it, in such conditions that were not conducive. Some of those seafarers have had to stay on board for 14 to 15 months at a time with families who have been suffering back at home in conditions that always haven't been where we would want them to be. Nevertheless, all of those products on our shelves, all the food we wanted, all the products we needed through the pandemic were there, accessible to us. Why? Because seafarers did not stop doing what they needed to do to keep the global economy moving. May I take this opportunity to ask everybody in this room and everybody watching to put your hands together for the 1.6 million seafarers around the world. Thank you very much for enabling that. Now then, Minister Iswaran and the Deputy Prime Minister talked about the industry requires nothing less than the transformation and the journey that we're on already. The DPM talked about a tectonic shift in geopolitics. He talked about 3 areas of transformation: higher rates and the possibility of excessive investment, but may cause a glut in shipping. He talked about the reliability of vessels arriving at ports has halved, and the opportunity to improve efficiency is large. He then also talked about the decarbonization challenge and the short-term headwinds, but a very, very strong foundation that lays ahead of us. He talked about resilience. He talked about the characteristic that's required for us to move forward and make that challenge something that is a challenge of the past, so that we can look forward to a decarbonization, to a carbon-free shipping industry. 1 billion tons we've got to abate in the shipping industry, ladies and gentlemen. 1 billion tons, 2 to 3% of the world's emissions. Let's not talk about 2050. Let's talk about the next 5 years. What needs to happen now? What needs to happen to accelerate the decarbonization journey? Let me pose that question first of all to Andreas.
So a lot of actions have to happen now, but we also have to realize that they will take time to mature. So they won't all be here in 5 years, but we have to start now working on them. And the 3 big paths, which many of you will be familiar with, one is take CO2 out of traditional fuels. And so CCS needs to be tackled, which allows us to use traditional fuels. The second one is biofuels. And that's a question of availability and cost, but also traceability. And the third big path is new fuels, which is also about availability and cost. But there are a lot of practical aspects around safety and handling. And that's one of the things that GCMD, the Global Center for Maritime Decarbonization, is very keen to work on, which is let's not only talk about them at the theoretical level, but let's get our hands on gaps and practical steps that propel this journey forwards.
Thank you, Andreas. Kah Peng, you have a fantastic vantage point, I would say, at the helm of the Shell group of companies in Asia. How do you think we can accelerate this program?
Well, first, I do think that we have to make our ambition very transparent and not just commit to it for 2050, but bring it much nearer term. So for us, we've said, look, by 2030, we want to halve our own emissions in this country, and that's massive. That's 2.5 million tons, maybe closer to 3, I would say, of carbon abatement by the end of this decade. So I think making your ambition transparent is one, but then turning it into action is another one. We've already cut half the amount of crude that we're processing in Singapore. But then, when you start talking about building new supply chains that are needed for biofuels, for example, that's not a small challenge. Now, that supply chain does exist in some ways already, whether you're talking about collecting waste oil, waste animal fat, these supply chains do exist, but not at the scale that we need. So for us, the question is, how do we bring our ambition, our very near-term ambition, take the supply chains that exist, and then massively and rapidly scale? The third thing I want to also talk about is, when we say that we are looking at new fuels, and yes, there will be multiple pathways for decarbonization, we need to look beyond fuels as well. We need to look at all the technologies that will enable efficiencies today, technologies like fuel cells that will work with various types of fuel, and therefore look at it as energy and not just fuels. So increasingly, we want you, all of you here, to think of Shell as an energy company, not just an oil or a gas or well, call us what you will, but we are an energy company. So I think we do have to then look beyond fuels at the broader range of technology that's available to all of us. And let's not forget, there are solutions available today. LNG is available today. We've spent the last 7-8 years investing to build infrastructure all around the world, including in Singapore, to enable the bunkering of LNG. That's already going to cut GHG by, what, a quarter?
Indeed.
Compared to existing fuels? And, we used to say, well, LNG is a transition fuel, but I think it's a fuel in transition, because you've got to think about that beyond today to say, what is the future going to look like if you can get to bio-LNG, you can get to synthetic LNG? So, I think there are possibilities
That's right.
that are available even today that we cannot say we will not take advantage of.
Indeed. LNG is indeed a fuel in transition. Now then, Jeremy, with all that said, you have the vantage point of being one of the largest container liners in the world, millions of TEUs, and you have the responsibility of not only doing that at the lowest cost, safely, delivering social value around it, but the world is also looking towards you to say, how are you going to do that by abating as much carbon as possible? What are your thoughts?
Well, indeed, Rashpal, and the world is looking at us to do this as shipping. Our customers are very, very much pushing us. I think our staff, our management, our stakeholders all want to decarbonize the world. But it's the practical realities of that. So we see methanol-ordered ships just being made now, ammonia-ready ships just being made now. The key thing, though, is to make sure that we have enough green fuel available 3 to 4 years out, so when those ships come off the production line and other orders will hopefully be made in the next 6 to 9 months, that we have at least the start of real green fuel, which links us back, frankly, to green hydrogen, is what the key building block will be. So we just take the Deputy Prime Minister's figure of 100,000 vessels out there, and the ship takes 25 years on average over its working lifetime, then reality is that we need to start replacing creating green ships and ordering green ships and delivering green ships, probably about 4% a year. So that's 4,000 vessels a year to come out of the shipyards on a continuous, sustainable basis for the next 25 years. So that means ordering, manufacturing, and delivering, and having the green fuel ready. And to do that, it means, of course, that the rest of the fleet, so in year one, 4% is converted to green fuel. The other 96% is still running on carbon fuels. Those 96%, as Andreas has rightly pointed out, if we can get some carbon capture in there to try and help some of those reduce their carbon footprint, that's great. But the reality is that we're going to need market-based measures, and we're going to need incentives to accelerate the availability of that green fuel and to make sure those orders are coming through at that 4% level each year. And to do that, we need to have some kind of levy, some levy on bunker fuel, which probably initially in the first year needs to be about $30 a ton across all fuels. So the 96% pay the $30, and then that money is then collected, and that then comes back as a rebate of some form to level up the other just the 4% that are already on the green fuel. So this is where we're getting to the real practicalities. We're having to make and commit to orders in our boardrooms, make financing with our banks, working with the energy companies. We've really got to start doing that now as an industry to get that 4% changeover happening year on year, going forward as soon as possible.
Fantastic. There's a plan laid out already for us. And if I may take that point that you just made, Jeremy, and throw over to Stephen, because the question has just come through. I'm not sure if we can put it up on the screen here, which I think is very appropriate. Stephen, this question is for you. Where are the biggest sources of green finance funding today, and how can Maritime tap into them? So bridging what Jeremy just talked about, the enablement needs to come by way of levy perhaps, but also through green financing. What are your thoughts?
Well, I certainly agree with Jeremy on the need for market-based measures. I think most of us probably would do. You know, we have to make the carbon fuels at least as expensive as the sustainable fuels. But coming more to the question, I think, you know, what we need in the financial industry is greater transparency. And what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is that for many, many years, we've been taking lending decisions based on financial information, so based on credit risk, not asset risk. And what we need, and what we're now starting to get, and the Poseidon Principles has been one of the great contributors to this, what we're now getting is underlying data on vessels' performance. And we can now use that data that we get to not necessarily offer green finance per se, because actually to get ship finance qualifying as green is really incredibly difficult right now. If you look at the EU taxonomy, you can't really get a shipping loan to qualify as green. But what we can do is to offer financial incentives to owners to reduce their carbon emissions. So what many of the banks are offering, including ING, is what we call sustainability-linked loans. So we will measure your environmental performance on day one, and if you continue to improve and largely follow the IMO pathway, then you can expect a reduction in your interest rate margin. Now, if you don't perform in line with that pathway, then you can also expect a penalty, that your interest margin will go up. Now, this is becoming an increasingly common product that banks are offering. The challenge we have is that interest margin comes out of our own profit line, which is fine, but really what we want to see is bank regulators agreeing to lower capital weightings for the greener assets. And we haven't yet got that, but I hope that we will do going forward.
Can I just challenge that for a moment? You know, because sustainability-linked loans are fantastic, but they're 10 basis points, 20 basis points. It's a nudge, which is great and important. But how do we get finance to really move the needle on things that are a little bit riskier, or where actually debt cost has to come down more significantly? You know, how do you see finance playing a role in a bigger nudge?
Well, in terms of the margin, that's where we really need the bank regulators to get on side. Because at the end of the day, you know, one of our major financial metrics is return on equity. And if we can allocate lower equity against a loan, then we can afford to offer a greater margin reduction. So I think that's perhaps the major thing. And I've forgotten the second part of your question, Andreas.
No, I think that was just how do we create bigger impetus for the finance sector to finance riskier things? You've answered one is the regulatory framework.
Well, I think, I'm sorry, that was a very good question. And I think what we need is, and you'll hear this term, and you have heard this term many times already, we need greater collaboration. You know, what banks are able to do is to take credit risk, but we're not really able to take innovation risk. And what we really need is to allocate the risks in a transaction where the technology is perhaps unproven. We need to allocate those risks to the parties who are best able to take them. So banks don't want to take operating risk or technical risk. We'll take the credit risk, but those other risks have to be allocated. Now, I would say that the technology risk should really go to the shipyards and the engine manufacturers, and there has to be some kind of performance guarantee that if the ship doesn't perform according to the specs, they're at risk for that. The operating risk should really lie with the ship owner themselves. They have to demonstrate that they're able to operate the ships with this new technology, and the banks take the credit risk. So really it's a sharing of risks with those parties who are best able to manage them.
I think that's right. It's a sharing of risks, both from an equity and interest perspective. There's a question that's coming. Thank you very much for the questions that are coming from the audience. I'd much rather that you carry on bringing in those questions and we can ask those questions that come in on the live portal, because that also means that you know that the questions haven't been set up earlier with answers from the panel. So you'll be getting answers that are right here and right now. So that question that's just come in and has got a number of votes, this is for you, Jeremy. With all the focus on sustainability transition, why are there still owners ordering new ships running on HFO and scrubbers, to your point about the 4% move per annum?
Yeah, thank you, Rashpal. Because in reality, right now, in terms of real green fuel, as in methanol, green hydrogen, ammonia, that there isn't enough of that available at scale. So really, you have a number of options when you're ordering ships right now. One, of course, is to go LNG, which we understand the logic behind that, and with the view that over time, hopefully we can get to green LNG, and therefore you can maintain the existing asset and you can change the fuel type over. The second one is to go straight away for a dual fuel scenario where you could burn methanol like Maersk is doing, and actually procuring the whole supply chain upstream as well to get the methanol, which I think is an amazing feat, and they're to be congratulated on that. But not everybody's in that situation. And the third way is to build an asset which initially is probably going to use fuel oil, but which could be converted over, retrofitted within 2, 3, 4 years when the new green fuels become available. So you know how you're going to run it on methanol, you know how you're going to run it on ammonia, and therefore you design the vessel, the tanks, the safety systems, so that as soon as that becomes available at scale, you can then take the ship back into the shipyard and retrofit it so that it can then be converted for the rest of its life to run on the green fuel. So those are really the three scenarios, and that's why right now there aren't so many orders, and we need to create this market-based measures, and we need the green fuels to come forward, and we need the shipyards to be able to build green ships at scale in terms of the number of ships we can produce each year. And then, I think we're going to get towards that quite soon, I hope, but that's what's really needed. Thank you.
Andreas.
I'm so glad that Jeremy used this word reality at the beginning of his comment, because I think what we've done really well over the past couple of years is aspirations. And we've set these aspirations for 2050, and the aspirations are so important in setting the direction of where we want to go. But you cannot solve a problem if you don't know or you're unwilling to face what the reality is. And Jeremy was alluding to the reality of these new fuels not being available today. I mean, the reality is that these new fuels need renewables. And the reality is that you need 4 times the capex to produce wind versus gas. And the reality is you need 4 to 5 times the amount of minerals and materials to produce solar PV cells than you need to power off gas. And we've lulled ourselves into this idea that we have the solutions because, the politicians have told us, haven't they, that the wind and solar are cheaper than everything else. And that's only true if you don't want it 24 hours a day. And so we're in this sort of state of complacency. Why not just switch off building ships with traditional fuels? Well, then goods won't flow around the world because there isn't enough ammonia and hydrogen and biofuels and so on. So I think it's really important. Just one more point of this. I think that we've also been lulled into complacency because a lot of these improvements we've seen, which have been fantastic, have been because of cheap energy, cheap money, and free trade under global peace, Pax Americana or whatever people call it. And I think these are all reversing. You know, energy is getting more expensive. Minerals and metals are getting more expensive. Money is getting more expensive. And the free trade is not quite as easy as it used to be. And so we just have to be realistic.
Okay.
I'm optimistic about the future, but be realistic for now.
Lulled into a false sense of security.
Loud and
energy
clear,
costs are
right?
high.
That realities are realities, and you know, every morning you wake up, you look at what's real around you. It seems to get more and more difficult and more harsh. So completely agree with that. I think there is still a question of, so given all the realities, what's going to change? How's our approach going to change to potentially not looking for a single pathway and saying, let's find the perfect green fuel of the future and say, what are the different pathways we have to explore to get there? And there will be multiple pathways. If nothing else, you know, the energy security debate that is now raging is telling us we need diversity of options, right? You need to have the agility and the willingness and the capacity to build multiple pathways. And I'm discovering that even in our organization, that yes, you can think of all the possibilities, but it's also the capacity of the organization to then make those changes real that sometimes, you know, kind of gets in the way. So I'm with you. Second point I want to make is, what can, you know, governments, and this was something that Stephen made a point about earlier, what can governments as well as international organizations do to help bring about the environment, whether it's through regulations, standard setting, ambition setting, you know, coordination of all kinds of issues? What can they do more actively to try and support and help drive that change? So that, you know, we can all go and say, yes, that's the reality, but, you know, we are going to still move forward.
But I guess, Kah Peng, I agree. The fact of the matter is that the people who are going to make that change are sitting in this room. And Stephen, your thoughts?
Well, I wanted to come back on a point that Jeremy made about, you know, building ships to change engines in 3-4 years. And you know, at the moment, we design and build ships to last 25 years, and they're not designed to have their major components swapped out. And I think what we need to do as an industry, we need to change the way we design and build ships. So we need to build more modular ships where we can swap parts in and out easily, so plug and play. And I think if we can do that, then we can develop financing around that. If you look at the aviation industry, the airframes and the engines are often financed separately. That doesn't happen in shipping at all. But why can't we get to a point whereby we build a ship today with conventional engines, which can easily be swapped out in 3 or 4 years' time and can be financed separately? You know, why do we feel that we can't do that today? And it's simply because we don't design ships to achieve that.
Okay.
So I think we really need to change the way we design and build ships.
Stephen, that's a great point. That's a challenge to all those out there who are naval architects and working with shipyards and operators. Let's make our ships more component-based and modularized so that we don't have to take a 25-year view.
And just as a follow-up to Kah Peng's point, you know, realism doesn't mean being despondent or pessimistic or depressed. Human beings are amazing. I mean, we've done amazing things through hard work and incremental progress. And I think what scares me right now is the number of people who think we can just flick a switch and just turn this off and do this, and it's all going to be easy. And I think what we have to say is we're going to get there, we're going to solve this problem, but it's going to take really hard work and it's going to take incrementalism. So let's start now and take these pathways, but nothing to be depressed about, just be realistic.
Absolutely. Now then, we are quickly moving through this from a time point of view. There's one question here that I really want the panel to answer in the same vein. It's from Jan Christoph. Thank you for your question. What is the single most important step to reach zero carbon shipping? A very short answer from each of you, please. Jeremy?
I would say get the regulation in place, but the most critical part is to produce enough green hydrogen for the shipping industry.
Andreas?
Sorry, you said the single most what?
The single most important step to reach zero carbon shipping.
I'm going to decline to give a single step because I think this challenge is too complex and too important to boil it down to a single step. It's
Come on, Andreas. One out of your kitty of many areas that you need to
I think then I'll echo Jeremy.
Yeah.
It's money. I mean, finance, carbon tax, whatever you call it, is critical to unlock because these gaps are too big today. But I really would emphasize again, it's not about single switches. It's not about single steps. It's about doing 100, 1,000 things that will incrementally get us there.
Absolutely.
I'm completely with Andreas here. I will not answer this question because there is no single important step. If we all believe that we can get there, if we took that one single step, I'm not there yet.
So let's ask the question differently. It will be a multitude of steps that will come together, and there might be 4 or 5 here. What would one of them into that group of steps be for you?
Well, putting a price on carbon is a big step.
Yeah.
And how does this price of carbon exist for international shipping?
Excellent. Stephen?
Well, I agree with my fellow panellists. I don't think there's one single step, and of course, one step will hopefully lead to another step. That's kind of what a step means. I can only really talk on the finance side, and of course, without finance, there are no new buildings. So I think that banks have a very important role to play in all of this, which is why we introduced the Poseidon Principles almost 3 years ago. At the time, Poseidon Principles was criticised because it was felt it was too ambitious. It's now been criticised because it's not ambitious enough. And I think that I agree with that. And I think you should expect to see that the Poseidon Principles will become more ambitious. It will become more transparent. We'll be asking banks to report different figures rather than just the IMO figure. So we may well be asking you to report on a 0 by 2050 pathway. And we may well be asking you to report on an absolute carbon figure, because of course the AER is a relative score. And I think if we can do that, that will help focus the mind as to where the finance is directed, and that in turn will be a big step. So,
thank you, Stephen. I'm going to move on now because we're running out of time very quickly. The second topic that I want to broach today is talent. So this question goes to Kah Peng. How are your recruiting practices changing, and how will talent be sourced differently over the next 5 years?
Oh, there are so many things you need to do on talent, right? I mean, if I just look out at this room, talent can get more diverse, even from just a simple gender point of view. But a couple of things on how we're changing the way we think about talent. First, it's got to be broad-based talent. We can't just say, hey, we're an engineering company, we need a lot of engineers and science-based graduates. Yes, we still need all of those, but recruiting broad-based means that we believe that many people with many different types of backgrounds can bring perspectives and ways of thinking that will help solve a very complex problem. So we are recruiting across the board. Doesn't matter whether you have a STEM education or not, completely across the board. So I think that's one. But, much more than just recruiting, I think the question is, how do you develop them? When they join a large company like Shell, what do we do with them? How do you make sure that while they are building the expertise and the depth that they will need, you are at the same time giving them exposure across the board? And, and when I say across the board, even in Shell, that's across a very, very big board. So how do we create opportunities for them to rapidly get that exposure, both internally and externally, and build what I think in the Singapore government, they will say, you're not looking for just peak peaks of excellence, but you're looking for the T-shaped talent, right? You're looking for somebody who's got both the breadth as well as over time the depth and the experience. Yeah. And I think the third part of it is really how do you create an environment where the networking and the thinking of how they go about that is part and parcel of saying that, you know, I can not only do my job well, but I got to reach out. You know, in a collaborative world, you have to really build that network consciously. Not just because you need to progress your career, but know that to solve complex problems, that network is going to come in all the time. So just a couple of dimensions to share.
Indeed. Now, Stephen, you come from an industry which, if I may call it, traditional in thought, perhaps, banking and finance is changing, of course. But I know that you have some quite strong views on talent and how we can think about this differently.
How long have I got?
2 minutes.
Yeah, look, I mean, banks have traditionally recruited graduates coming out of, you know, red brick universities, often with degrees which are totally relevant to the jobs that they're going to do. And I think, you know, what we're trying to do now is to change that. We want to bring in people with a much broader and diverse background, because diversity does undoubtedly lead to better quality decisions, because it's greater challenge in the process. So I think that's one thing we can do. But in terms of the maritime industry, I think we have a lot of PR to do. You know, when we see people coming into the bank at, you know, 21, 22, straight out of university, none of them want to come into shipping finance. We're seen as a boring, staid, dull industry. They all want to go into infrastructure or leverage finance, all the things that they think are sexy. Those ones who are unfortunate to come into shipping against their will, actually when they get here, they love it and they rarely want to leave. So we need to promote shipping as a forward-thinking industry, because that's what we are. We need to show them that we're embracing technology, because again, we are. And I think if we can do those things, then we can get real good, high-quality candidates into the industry.
Fantastic, Stephen. Thank you very much. Jeremy, how are you keeping that balance between great talent in your foremost organization, the localization in Singapore, the global talent that you require to be the best liner in the world?
Thank you, Rashpal. Yeah, I think, you know, this is something, a challenge for all of us in the workplace, and we have to make our companies more attractive. We need to retain our staff for much longer within our organizations and grow our own talent. And maybe 8, 9, 10 years ago, we didn't have to try so hard because the jobs market was relatively open. We've all found, certainly in the last 2 years, that's not the case. So what are we specifically doing? We're looking at trying to rotate our staff more. So we're looking to move staff every 3 or 4 years into a new department or a new role or a new challenge. If we can get them to move geographically, that's fantastic. That's not so easy these days, of course. But to try to rotate and give people more expertise and knowledge working across the organization, different areas. And I think the other big lesson for all of us going to virtual working has been how much we've been working across international teams in our companies. So doing a lot more workflow across organizations, across teams in different geographies as well is another area. And then the third one is developing our own talent in terms of recruiting and looking to retain those staff long-term on a career plan. I think those are the 3 areas that we're really focusing much more on.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. And Andreas, you have such a vantage point across many boards. You're the chairperson on many boards. You have a group of companies. You have a very global view. What are your thoughts about talent?
So I think part of your question is about what kind of skills do we need in future? And, you know, I think the core skills actually to run a shipping company are going to remain. It's not going to be drastically different in 10 years from now. But obviously, if we say we want to do digitalization, we want to do decarbonization, then we're going to need more technical people. We need more technological people. I think that's true, but we should be careful about running down this road of saying, let's just create lots of digital experts. Let's create lots of technical experts. In a fractured world, we're going to need more supply chain experts and we're going to need more lawyers to navigate fragmentation of rules and sanctions. In a world of stagflation, we're going to need more commercial people who can manage the revenue side and finance people who can manage the interest rate and risk side. In a world of rolling pandemics and of mental pressures and changing work environment, we're going to need great HR people and great crewing teams. You talked about that earlier, Rashpal. So it's constantly shifting, and talent has to be fluid, adaptable, amorphous, not just kind of let's run in this one direction. The other part of your question, just quickly, is how do you motivate people to come to shipping and so on? And apart from just being a fantastic industry that, as you said, Stephen, people come and they never want to leave, but to attract people, I think purpose, autonomy, mastery, and these are not mine, they're Daniel Pink in his book Drive. You know, you need a sense of purpose. Why are you doing this? You need a sense of autonomy. And by the way, we've had a taste of autonomy in the last 2 years where we're not going back. So you need to give people autonomy, and you need mastery, which is people need to sense personal growth, that they're learning, that they're being challenged. And that will make people want to stay.
Love it. Purpose, autonomy, mastery, and being amorphous. You heard it here. We're running out of time. One last sentence from each of you. I think the Minister has far and said there's going to be 10,000 people that come through the Singapore Maritime Week this week. Your one message to them about how they make this as productive as possible for themselves. Let's start off with Stephen.
How they
Make it as productive for themselves as possible.
I would say just be open-minded.
Kah Peng?
Have fun.
Fun.
You know, meaningful work is great, but fun work is even better.
Jeremy?
Reconnect. Get off that 2D and get back to those human relationships.
Absolutely. And Andreas?
Yeah, I was going to say have fun too, but actually I'll embellish that by saying just let's enjoy each other's company. It's great to be with all of you in person again.
And with that, a huge thank you to our panelists today, Jeremy, Andreas, Kah Peng, Stephen. Been a pleasure talking to you today. And hopefully everybody in this room and watching has been able to take something away for food for thought, provocative thought, some seed that's been planted for you to take forward this week. And once again, a huge thank you to Lei Hoon and the MPA team, who, as always, are absolutely fantastic in their preparation and putting together the 16th Singapore Maritime Week. A big round of applause, please, for our panelists and the MPA.
Lovely. Thank you very much for the pro tip there. Great moderation by Mr. Bhatti and our esteemed panelists. Please stay here on stage as we have token of appreciations to present to you. I'd like to invite our Chief Executive of MPA, Ms. Kwa Lei Hoon, to join us once again on stage. And because we have a bigger group right now, what we'll do is Ms. Kwa will present the token one by one, and then she'll take a picture with each recipient, and later on a group picture with everyone. So first up, we have Mr. Stephen Fewster. We'd like to present this token of appreciation to you. And then you have big smiles for the camera. They can remove their masks, right, for this photo? Yes. Do you need help with that? I think we have our ushers. Oh, okay. We've gotten really good at this. Thank you. And next we'll present it to Ms Aw Kah Peng, a token of appreciation. Big smiles for the camera, ladies. And appreciation to Mr. Bhatti for moderating this livening and enlightening conversation panel session. And next, a token of appreciation to Mr. Andreas Sohmen-Pao. finally to Mr. Jeremy Nixon. Thank you for being here with us. Lovely, and now we'll gather for a group photo. How shall we do this? Okay, we'll invite Ms. Kwa to just join us right at the front. Yeah, this is a mask off. Yeah, we can have our mask off for this photo taking, less than 10 on stage. So we've checked. And to get our panelists to stand, please, to come around. Thank you very much to our panelists, and do remember to have your mask on as you step off stage to put your mask back on. Thank you for really joining us and sharing your nuggets of information, wisdom actually, on how we can have a fruitful time and week ahead. We'll give our panelists a moment as they return to their seats and enjoy the rest of the day ahead. Once again, it's been really delightful to have all of you with us here in the room and those who have joined us virtually online as well. As many of our panelists and speakers say, what a delight to be spending this week ahead, learning together, connecting, and most importantly, having fun as you do the work. Now that said, ladies and gentlemen, we've now come to the close of the opening ceremony. For all our guests, please continue to remain seated. I'd like to invite Ms. Kwa Lei Hoon, along with her guests, to join us for the Marine Tech Exhibition ribbon cutting ceremony that's happening at Level 4 shortly. So I'm sure, yes, Ms. Kwa is along with our guests that are involved for the Level 4 ribbon cutting ceremony. I believe our ushers will show you the way, so just take a moment to prepare yourselves. Now for the rest of our guests here with us, please stay, and I'm pleased to announce that lunch will be served very shortly to you at your tables. So please ensure that at this point your masks are still on at all times and you can remove them once there's food and drinks at your table. All right, if you do want to interact with your friends across the table, you can do so with your mask on and just cross over and have those conversations. Thank you very much. Once again, it's been such an honor and pleasure to be your MC. I'm Carissa Seat. Have a wonderful, fruitful, and fun week ahead. See you. Have a great day.